Hi everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ciara and I'm the Digital Events Manager at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSoup are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. For those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand facilitate an annual trailing calendar of online webinars, workshops, boot camps and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. You should check out our training and education menu on our website for more events coming up online. But enough about that. I'm excited to welcome you today to Unleashing the Power of HR Technology, building a compelling business case for non-for-profit HR practitioners with Robert Watson, Partner Director of ELMO Software. Robert has over 25 years local and international experience in partner management and is passionate about nurturing long-term win-win relationships. He's been a part of the ELMO senior sales leadership team since 2009 and has since driven hypergrowth for the partner business. Robert is joined today by Kate Hickman, the Chief People Officer at Info Exchange. Kate brings extensive experience in leading change management across many organizations and industries, and many years as a consultant before stepping into the human resources role in most recent years. And we're also joined today by Mark Baseman, Director of Human Capital Consulting of Deloitte. Mark is a proven global transformation leader with over 20 years experience. His strength is the ability to understand an organization and execute strategy across the organization through motivating all key stakeholders to key objectives or vision. Some housekeeping now for everyone. All your lines are muted, so if any technical issues, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel and I'll be able to assist you. If you have any questions throughout the session, please also type these into the question box and our panel will answer them either during the session when possible or at the end of the webinar. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as you think throughout the session to make this as dynamic and interactive as possible. Remember, no question is too silly, but also note your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. And if possible, please close all other programs to make sure you have the best experience today. Note, this webinar is also being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you as soon as we can after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there's a short survey at the end of the webinar and would really appreciate if you could take the time to complete this. Thanks all for that. I will hand you over to Robert and enjoy. I think you are on mute, Robert.
Yes, I was. Sorry about that, everybody. Thanks, Ciara, for handing over. Yeah, thank you for everybody for joining, and a special thank you to Kate and Mark for joining me. So today, what we would like to talk about is best practice methodologies for getting a budget approval and a project plan approval for the purchase of an HR system. And we thought we'd just quickly cover that off by quickly going through what we've seen in the past, what we're seeing now in terms of patterns, and what we're seeing in the future. And then we'll talk about what we would recommend that you do moving forward as a best practice, and some tricks and tips and so on to do that. So for me, I'm going to be asking particularly Mark and Kate a few questions, and we have a few slides to show, particularly from Mark. But I guess the first question that I want to put to the panel, and I'll answer my questions first and then hand over to Mark. But the first thing we thought we'd explore was, what did an HRIS or Human Resources Information System landscape look like in the past, and what were the key challenges that HR was facing, particularly in the not-for-profit? And from ELMO's position, what we were seeing in terms of that procurement landscape was very much, there were very, very few tenders. Very much it was quite casual, I guess, in a way. There was a lot of procurement that was going on without clear thought and direction as to why are we buying this, what do we want to do with it once we get it? We have a belief that we need it, but we really haven't really thought through what we need and why. And a lot of HR directors, and this is the human piece, were really purchasing technology for the first time, and they felt very uncomfortable doing so. Some of the challenges, though, the big challenge that I guess people in general wanted to sort out was, it was really the beginning of a mass migration off the spreadsheet, and in some cases people were skipping the whole spreadsheet piece but going straight from paper to a more digital system. So Mark, maybe I'll share this first slide of yours, and maybe you would take the set.
No problems. Thank you and welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to share some of our observations and learnings around what is becoming a more critical topic for every organisation, no matter who you are and what sector you're in. What I think Robert touched on was what we saw in the past is organisations looked at individual elements of activity very independently of each other. So when you look at what really creates a strong HRIS, it's made up of a core source of record or a HCM platform, supported by a more powerful tool, which often is called workforce management, that handles your rostering, your scheduling, and also, more importantly, any of the interpretational elements you need in interpreting the time that your team works and how they and where they work that time. And lastly, payroll as that engine that really just calculates, as a result of the first two components, what people need to be paid, and ensures that that's done accurately and in a timely fashion. Now, what we've seen in the past is they were all very independently managed, independently scoped, and as a result, they didn't consider the interdependencies between each particular group of activities, nor were they owned by a single person across an organisation. So we saw more and more, even in the very small not-for-profits, that different people had influence or control over what was being designed and what was being built to satisfy their requirements without necessarily thinking of the holistic requirements of the organisation. So that created a lot of inaccuracies of data, it created a lot of issues, a lot of manual processes, and most importantly, a workload for the organisation that didn't necessarily provide efficiency. In fact, often created additional workload that people started to question, why did they put the system in the first place? It's just made life harder. So I think that's where we've come from, but very important to appreciate that many organisations are still in this mode, and they're still very much with three different activity sets, all being done very differently, with different expectations, and most importantly, with different design principles being used to actually design and build the processes and systems.
Yeah.
I think Kate, from your perspective, I think you've probably seen this in a more day-to-day, real-life situation.
Yeah, look, I think agree that there's segregation between the way that these three elements have necessarily been managed and owned and maintained. So I think we've certainly seen the combination of manual, even paper-based files still existing for personnel. And we're also seeing, the HR role is sometimes part of someone's bigger role. So, working across payroll may be a different system, and that's where data may be held, but then is data also held in spreadsheets? Is there a dependency on the people who actually have the knowledge of where it's, the deeper knowledge around things, particularly the workforce management? Where is the right data? How do we have the accuracy of reporting when it's across different people or a minute part of a broader function where HR is operating, and across those different platforms or mechanisms to be able to manage those three components? So certainly inefficiencies and double handling, combination of paper, spreadsheets, shared files, systems. So yeah, challenges, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
My apologies.
So-
I'm just doing a little bit of a tour for everyone as I move from one space to another. My apologies.
Have you been kicked out of your room?
I've been politely asked to move to the next room across, which is so just a little bit of a tour of the Deloitte building for everyone.
Excellent. So if that's the past, where are we now, I guess, and what are we seeing? And I think from ELMO's perspective, what we saw is a massive uplift in the professionalism of the procurement of this kind of technology, but it was also spurred on a lot by COVID, especially where people were no longer allowed in the office, and so they, when you start actually emailing everybody spreadsheets and everybody updates it, but then forgets to forward it on, you end up with multiple versions of the truth. And we had a range of clients really concerned about that, including a not-for-profit sector that was really reaching out for help. And the other thing that we saw from ELMO's perspective was really a significant turnaround in other aspects of the business getting involved in the procurement decision. So IT stepping in, having a look, and asking questions like, is the solution ISO 27001 certified? A lot of HR people didn't know what that was. Where is the data hosted? That wasn't a normal question that HR people would normally ask. And what API capability does it have? Again, a question that not a lot of HR people really could handle. So what we ended up seeing from the back of that was a significant uptick in tenders. So Mark, maybe if I flicked back to the deck and moved on to the next slide, which is your current status slide, maybe you could talk to that.
Yeah, let me just capture, I think you touched on some, what we saw through COVID is an acceleration of issues that were there, and people were aware of the issues, but we were able to almost ignore those issues in the reality because we had workarounds and we were used to working in an environment that allowed us to find, in effect, the greyness and find our way through that. What COVID did is it just exposed the lack of actually transparency and auditability on everything related to people. We all of a sudden had to understand who everyone was, what skills they were, where they lived, where they were working, how they were working, all the information that we'd often have, within people's heads that we could turn around in the office and talk to or ask a question of, all of a sudden needed to be a lot more transparent for everybody. Employees needed a lot more transparency. And I think, we've also had another significant shift in recent years, and that is all of a sudden cybersecurity and where data is being protected and housed has all of a sudden taken a much higher priority for us all, and not just in the HR space, but generally for businesses. And I think that has led to a really significant shift. And what we see currently is the HR ecosystem has moved from being what was traditionally a transactional part of a organization's IT stack or IT platform to being now a very strategic element in understanding your workforce, understanding the efficiencies you need to drive through delivering the outcomes that you have every day to take to your clients or customers. And more importantly, that the disparate activity that was going on previously has to come together. You need to be able to rely on the data. You need to know that the data is accurate. And as a result, the three platforms now and the three different activity groups have to work together. Now, they also, and this is the critical element, they have to work together supported by processes that actually enable a user experience that makes and helps people be compliant. And when we talk about compliance, it's not paid compliance, that's a specific issue, but compliance to actually doing what is necessary within the system every day in a harmonious way that allows those data sets to live and breathe and actually provide you with a baseline to accurately report on what's happening within your organization. More importantly, and I think the controls element has become more and more critical as we look and we face even greater pressure on pay compliance. There is no doubt that, you know, we are going to see continued emphasis on paying people fairly and accurately for their contribution. That is really easy to say, a lot harder to do. And again, why the need for the ecosystem to work harmoniously is becoming more critical. And finally, you need to think about your operating model. How are you going to manage and maintain, particularly as Kate indicated earlier, quite often, you know, the very small number of resources that are involved in this process, and how do you ensure the efficiency and the utilization of the platform in a really harmonious way. But I think for me currently, the shifts that we're seeing are, firstly and most importantly, and I'll talk about why we're seeing this as really critical, is consistency and accuracy of the systems working together harmoniously for accurate data. Secondly, enabling people to be compliant with your requirements within a system. And finally, to be able to be comfortable that you're paying people fairly and accurately. And we use those words because fairly and accurately is, you know, I mean, that is compliant, but it's about you being comfortable that people are being treated fairly and accurately given their contribution to the organisation. I will say one thing, and this is something that Kate and I touched on yesterday. As humans, we are really lazy. You know, I often reflect on, you know, where we are on the equilibrium from a sloth to something a little bit more active, but we're definitely, if we get a chance to do something in an easier fashion, we will. We will work around systems, we'll work around processes, we'll avoid controls if we can. So it's really important that when you look at how your ecosystem comes together, no matter what size it is, it's really important that you keep that in mind, because you have to maintain that level of compliance and rigor and discipline to ensure that the business outcomes you're trying to drive can be reliably and consistently delivered.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Probably to build on that as well, you know, definitely the ease of use is incredibly important. You know, just the feeling of knowing that you need to go into potentially 3 different platforms or 3 different, you know, channels to be able to process an end-to-end life cycle for an employee versus being able to have all of that in one system where the duplication is reduced. The discipline that, you know, does need to come with that is even around storing information on emails or flicking something through to somebody rather than using the system. It's a behaviour that has to go along with any change. I think for me, being in this space, you know, when I look at, you know, the potential of how HR can be underpinned by great HRIS is around knowing what problems it is that we're wanting to solve. Because that's how we can then measure whether we're going to get a return on investment of investing in something that is going to be, whether it's ease of use, efficiency, accuracy, the ability to actually make decisions based on the data and knowing it is the single source of truth. So I think there's certainly an element of being clear around, you know, do we have to, you know, have all these systems or have something and every module turned on, for instance, or do we go with what makes sense for now in solving our problems, and then growing that maturity and the discipline and the behaviour to then be able to go the next step. So, you know, I think that's certainly something there at the moment, as well as doing the day-to-day job, which is not technology.
I think that's a really good point you made, Kate, and we talk to clients about this all the time. This is, often hear consultants talk about transformation, drives me absolutely nuts. it's about how do you evolve as an organization. And I think, Kate, to your point, it's being really focused on what are the critical elements that feed into what you're trying to deliver as an organization, and how do you evolve all of your support processes and systems to support those outcomes. And we often think, and often people will be presented with transformational opportunities, and in effect all that does is sometimes make things too big, too difficult, and the solution may be not necessarily a technology one. It can actually be more around some of your process disciplines, your operating model, and even to a degree your controls. So I think there is that, to your point, you need to step back and be really, really clear about what is it that we're trying to do and how do we then do that. And I think that's the key question you need to be really clear in your mind. And we'll talk about this as we go into the next phase, but more and more importantly, as we go forward, it's going to be paramount that you don't change things for the sake of changing them because someone suggests that you could or you should, but you change them because it's a key part of a roadmap or an evolution that allows your organization to organically evolve to where it needs to. And I think if hopefully we've learned anything out of COVID, is we are very adaptable as humans, and we are very adaptable as organizations, and we just need to be more comfortable that that evolutionary process just needs to be an organic way in which we evolve as organizations every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Completely. All right. Well, look, let's have a look at the future state, and I don't think we're not talking about 10 years away. We're talking probably two or three. Where is HRIS procurement going, and what trends can we see and predict? From ELMO's point of view, we're seeing more and more data-driven decisions. It's the justifications are getting very, very pointed, and the questions that are being asked are getting more and more specific as we move forward. And we are seeing a significantly greater embracing of HRIS as a platform moving forward for not-for-profits, and some of that is because people are more comfortable with it, and some of it's because some of the funding models that are out there are requiring people to move to these things. But Mark, what are you seeing?
I think to your point, Robert, I think there's a significant shift that's starting that will advance at a rapid rate. And again, it comes back to a lot more of a holistic driver. And what we're seeing is, firstly, organisations, as I said before, are now clearly seeing their HRIS or their HR ecosystem as a key differentiator for them to be able to support and deliver efficiencies in what they do every day. And if I just talk to one thing that I think is going to be a growing need for us all, and that is having a better understanding of the well-being of our people and how they're working and what they're working. We've introduced, through COVID, we've been, again, amazingly adaptive in regards to how we work and where we work and how that changes the outcomes we're delivering every day and the way we measure performance. And I think in that, we've also got to remember about the well-being and the impact that some of that is having on our people. So our ability to, again, step out with your HR ecosystem away from it being just transactional, how we manage to recruit people and pay people, to how we actually understanding what our people are doing, how they're doing it, how we can help them do it more effectively, how we actually utilizing each of our resources more effectively, and finally, how are we making sure that we do stay compliant. And what we're seeing already is that, things like generative AI, and the genie is out of the bag. We'll be honest, but we'll first see generative AI feature in more automated workflows and choices to make activity more efficient. But the longer journey with generative AI, and when we talk longer journey with generative AI, we used to 10 years, but the reality now, generative AI is going to be all over us in probably 3 to 5 years. And then we'll see the next level, which will be predictive AI. But what that will rely on is that you do have a data set that is holistic and supports you being able to actually get a better understanding of your teams, how you leverage those, how you engage them, and how do you make the work journey for them a much more enjoyable one. And this for me is changing the way, as Robert said, people are procuring these systems. So we're really trying to get people to go, don't go out and buy a system. Understand exactly, going back to Kate's point, exactly what do you want? What is your organization? What does it do? What's important from a people perspective about your organization? What makes you what you are, who you are, and as good as you are? And then how do you then say, as a result of that, what do we need from a system that helps and supports, drives those outcomes and keeps us true to who we are and what we're there to deliver? And I think we had a great discussion with a not-for-profit client yesterday, and it was just intriguing when we look at what they're wanting from their ecosystem. And it's a lot about understanding the well-being of their team, how they're working, when they're working, how that's impacting on their lives. But then more importantly, trying to use some technology to better and more effectively roster and schedule their people from a cost perspective. Because obviously, particularly in the not-for-profit space, you're constantly looking for efficiencies to increase the outcomes to your clients. How do we get better at doing what we do, but do it with more efficiency and more effectiveness? And again, I think that's where HR technology is taking a step away from, I'm just here to make sure people get paid right and we know, who everyone is, to actually how do we get insights and understanding that changes and improves the way we operate every day. And as a result, the work journey for every employee, past, future, and present is actually a better one. So, I'll just add one last thing and then I'll throw back. But the other thing that I think everyone has to be comfortable with is, and you'll hear me always say, transparency, transparency, transparency. Employees, people expect more transparency. Your organization expects more transparency than they ever have. And the government is now going to demand more and more transparency from us. So it's not a choice. A lot of people haven't got an ecosystem that is actually built to be transparent. And as you go forward, so when we look at the future, the level of transparency that you will have to be to your team members, to your stakeholders, and ultimately to the government is going to continue to dial up and up to a point where information we used to keep quite close to our chest will be known by everybody and anybody. And I think that's something that we all have to get a lot more comfortable with, and comfortable with very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think probably to build on that also, for those in Australia with 100+ employees, the WGEA reporting as an example, which for HR professionals who spend hours and hours and days in doing this every year, gathering that information out of a system where you trust the data and it is maintained throughout the year accurately will make that so much easier. And the visibility to the public, from next year onwards is certainly, going to represent your organisation as to where you have come from and where you're going when it comes to gender, as an example. And I think circling back on that confidence in data is how much time as a HR professional are we spending on trying to analyse the data and work out, is that accurate, or should we have gotten it from the payroll system? Do we need to cross-check with somebody else? Oh, hang on, forgot to put them in the system last week. You know, having a single source of truth is incredibly important, and knowing who in the team or who in the organisation is accountable for, you know, putting that data in. Is it HR? Is it actually the manager? So how can we create the efficiencies, workflows and things like that, which a good HRIS system can do. In fact, predicting the pathway of the employee life cycle. You've done this, you now need to go and do this, and being able to then allow HR to step up and be that strategic partner to the business in having those meaningful conversations, future-proofing the organisation through, you know, the talent planning and succession planning, the health and wellbeing. So having a good system that can bring those efficiencies and workflows and accountability and the confidence in what's in there allows HR to do so much more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I just want to add to that is you know, the technology can actually add and be more consistent in what we often leave in people's heads around decision making and history and how things work. And I think, you know, Kate, I think you highlight a really, really important point is, as we look at how do we operate more effectively and more efficiently, it's about the ability to replicate that outcome again and again and again really efficiently. Yeah. And most organizations tend to leave that in an individual's head, and you know, inevitably something happens, like they might want to take some leave, for example, and all of a sudden everything stops because that person's not there, or that person never really gets a good break because they're constantly feeling like they can't be away, particularly in, you know, some smaller organizations. And I think it's also about freeing up and taking away, you know, really, you know, consistent activity and turning it into something that is just a lot easier to manage, because you're then not reliant on an individual or an individual's past history or past knowledge.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely agree. So we've spoken a lot about what these business cases need to talk about and some of the benefits that can flow from them. But I guess the next piece of this puzzle is, how do HR professionals get a seat at that table to actually, and how do they package this information up to enable themselves to get a hearing? And you know, at ELMO, as a provider of HRIS, we still to this day find ourselves coming across HR people saying, I really, really wanted it, but you know, such and such on the board ended up saying no, or whatever else. And even though we ask who's involved in the decision-making process, sometimes they actually don't even know themselves that it has to go to various people. So it'd be interesting, and I'll go to the next slide, Mark, to hear your take on it, and then we'll get Kate's opinion as a practitioner in the not-for-profit space.
Yeah, I think I'm going to grab something that Kate said earlier, and I think we sort of touched on throughout the session. You need to understand your business and what the business is trying to drive and the outcomes but the reality is that every single business, the outcomes are delivered in one way or another by people. And it's your understanding of then the importance and the role that people play in delivering those outcomes, and how you can enhance that employee experience, that it gives you the greatest seat at the table to be able to then talk to what I often say is the so what. So what if we don't invest? So what if we don't look at how can we add value to our employees' experience, and as a result get greater outcomes from their contribution? And I think, you know, there's several different elements that you can break this down to. It's about future-proofing the organisation, and you know, right now, you know, one of the greatest challenges that everyone faces is skill shortage. Okay, so one of the biggest opportunities that everybody has is, how do you get better at future-proofing your organisation by understanding what the skills are? How do you manage that skill capability? How do you leverage skills within your business? you know, I mean, we recently worked with an organization just to go, let's find out actually the capability of everyone in your team. And this is only a 110 person business. They uncovered that people had capability they didn't know they had, that they could be utilizing. And what that enabled them to do is not need to expand with more headcount, but actually just to better leverage their team members and give their team members a better experience, because they're getting to do some things that they wouldn't normally get to do. But we're very qualified, skilled, licensed in some areas to be able to do that work. So when you're thinking about the future, think about what are the business needs going to be, not just today, but what is emerging in the market. And you know, skill shortage and the ability to engage and retain your employee base is just such a heavy element that everybody needs to be thinking about how they do that. Now, the way you do that will be very different organization by organization, but it's very important to understand what that future proofing and challenges are and how you might be able to respond to those. Remembering that your HR ecosystem is your enabler. It's not your solution, it's your enabler to drive outcomes. So, you know, it's about using a system to be able to, in that case, track and understand capability, allow them to be then released to be able to do the work that you're expecting, because you're rostering more effectively and efficiently. So it's leveraging your technology to help you deliver that outcome. Risk mitigation is a really, really big one. And we can't emphasize enough at the moment that the majority of poor pay compliance is driven by a lack of automated data and the amount of manual manipulation and the manual interpretation of activity. You know, we are really, really good at making decisions. Humans are not necessarily great at making consistent decisions or being able to consider all the various factors that come into determining, you know, exactly the data and the data sets that require accurate pay. Now, depending on how your organization works, how it remunerates people, etc., you know, that will play into it. But risk mitigation is also about, you know, as we go forward, you know, a lot about well-being. You know, whether we've got our heads around it or not, the whole health and safety, wellness, mental health, how that comes out. We've now got new legislation around, I can never say this word properly, my apologies, but psychosocial health. And I don't think I've got the word exactly right. I'm sure a lot of you are better at that than I am. But this is also about how are we tracking and understanding what our employees are doing? And can we put our hand in our heart and say that our employees are not working more than they should, or not, you know, working long hours, you know, for a long period of time? You know, we may have an essence of that, but if we're salaried employees, we're not really necessarily communicating that I'm still sitting there at 8 o'clock at night trying to get some things done, not finishing till 10:30, I'm back up at 6 o'clock to try and get to a meeting or whatever it might be. And so that understanding of what we're asking people to do and being able to have some measures of that from a well-being perspective is really important. And again, technology is your way to track and have facts and data points that enable you to have that conversation. So when we talk about risk mitigation, it's about also educating the organization on where are the risks from a people perspective and how do we actually mitigate those risks, again, through better, solid, consistent data that is able to give us good, solid data points. Cost and time savings, this is, you know, really depending on your organizational size, but the more manual processes you have, the more savings and time savings you'll have. Now, there will be an initial cost impact of obviously implementing technology, but let's be really clear, it's not necessarily just about the initial one-off cost, it's around the long-term savings you have in actually creating a lot of automated process flows, as well as some efficiencies in the way in which you operate. And right now, I think the most important element that we don't spend enough time talking to our senior managers and our boards about, and that is employee experience. You know, you talk about retention. The greatest challenge right now for so many people is the realities of putting food on the table and paying the mortgage, and the new electricity bill that just came at 3 times of what I expected it to be. And, you know, my employee experience is, I just want to make sure I get paid, right? I just need the money. So I think it's about understanding your workforce, understanding the circumstances of your workforce, and again, using your HR platform to be able to talk to the demographics of your group, to talk about where they're working, to talk about how they're positioned in the market, and have, again, really clear data set to be able to talk to. But I think, you know, those for me are how you sit back and put those 4 lenses to what is your business trying to achieve, and how do people drive those outcomes, and as a result of that, how can you improve that overall employee experience across their life cycle to really make it a much stronger experience for them and for the organization.
Awesome, well said. Kate, would you like to put a not-for-profit lens across those?
Yeah, so many good points raised there, Mark. A few that really stood out to me that I think are certainly relevant. That cost of living pressure, you know, as not-for-profits or community organisations, you know, we're not always able to be offering the salaries or significant benefits that perhaps public or corporate sector are able to offer. But I think also in turn, people generally join our sector not for that, but for the mission and connecting to the purpose of the organisation and what we're wanting to achieve. Having said that, there is still a desire for, you know, career progression where possible, or, you know, how else can I give to the organisation? So I wanted to circle back actually on the future-proofing side of it is, if you really do have that clarity around the skills, you're enabled to have the conversations with people when vacancies are coming up, or when the organisation needs to develop strategic initiatives to be able to push something forward or make a change. And being able to then leverage those skill sets to be able to offer things like internal mobility, secondments, be able to track people making movements in the organisation, what their aspirations are, and having that within a system is so much easier, again, as rather than being in a manager's head or an employee's head and not captured anywhere, that, you know, somebody outside of that very tight little circle would be able to go, hey, this person might be great for this, what can we do? I think we do have to think differently around that engagement and growth of employees in our sector where it's possible. So certainly systems can help in enabling that for sure. The other thing that you mentioned around risk mitigation, health and wellbeing, you know, you touched on overtime or people, you know, working longer hours. How do we actually know? Having systems that enable things like timesheets, and I know some people that the word timesheets is a bit of a freak out of, they're just not going to do it. I think being empowered to do timesheets to show just how much work you're doing, and that being the spin is, we want to know how much work is being done in the organisation. It helps us know, one, whether an employee is actually focused on the right tasks and priorities, or doing something that's taking 10 times as long as it should. So being able to capture time through a system to be able to help us unpick what's going on there. Do we actually need another resource? Do we actually need to change what we're doing, or can we actually put that down? Because workloads are increasing, and as health and wellbeing and mental health in particular is becoming a bigger challenge, people taking leave is putting workload pressures on other people. So how are we managing that, and how do we know who's actually wearing the burden? So absolutely, being enabled by a system where employees are empowered to put in what they're doing enables the meaningful conversation off a platform to say, so what are we going to do about it? How can we mitigate this or whatever. And all of that does contribute to time and cost. So if we have people working extensive hours, being paid overtime, but they're doing things that is not a priority for the organisation right now, it's costing us. It's costing us in well-being, it's costing us in salary, it's costing us in misdirected focus. So again, to be able to use data that's captured in a system to be able to refocus and recenter people, balance the workloads in organisation again, is incredibly important.
Can I just add a little? I think, Kate, I just want to paint a little bit of a futuristic picture here. Imagine a point where generative AI sits across your ecosystem and is able to draw in data from other systems. So all of a sudden, your email platform, whichever platform you use, starts feeding your well-being module, telling you how much time I've been on email, logging in, answering emails, both on my mobile device and on my laptop. All of a sudden, you know, we're getting into a few issues. Firstly, should I be paying that person for that work? I haven't asked them to do it, but they're doing it. How many hours are they actually working in a week? So they're actually working maybe 55, 60 hours a week, and you don't realize it because they're sitting at home, right? And they may feel a little bit guilty because they've decided to go out for lunch with some friends for 2 hours on a Friday, but they've worked till 7 or 8 o'clock at night that night, and probably every other night. And so some of the things that we're still getting our heads around, flexibility and support to employees to live a balanced life, I'm not sure we've got the balance right yet. But as we go forward and we look into the future, the ability for data, and if you have your ecosystem and you have it in a healthy state, you will be able to leverage that data to help and support your employees to find that balance, give them longevity, you know, to Kate's point, give them really clear career progression and career development. And that just makes it easier. And I think as we look forward, and I'm now talking out probably beyond 10 years, and we start talking predictive AI, you know, you'll start to get information that starts to talk about the fact that it will predict my behavior. It will predict that Mark is going to more than likely take a couple of sick days in the next 3 weeks, because his pattern of behavior over the last X amount of years says over the hours he's worked, he's going to run himself into the ground. And by the way, you could expect him to have a couple of days off. Now, if that's at a point where there's a critical client outcome you're trying to deliver, or a critical customer requirement, that's not going to be good. So, you know, again, it's just going to provide a lot more predictive understanding about how we help and support our team members. And, you know, the biggest challenge that we all have is helping organizations understand the noise, but make sense of that noise in regards to how from a people perspective, how do you make the impact that people have, and the way you can support that and grow that to driving better outcomes for the organization. And we know greater levels of engagement, greater levels of alignment to business outcomes does generate much higher levels of performance and much better business outcomes for those involved. So I sometimes get a bit nervous about what all this data and what all this generative AI is going to do from an awareness of what we do. But I think I go back to the transparency. We have to all be very prepared that what we do, how we do it, internally, externally, within our employee base, everything's going to become super, super transparent.
Fascinating. Kate, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think, you know, when it comes to the business case, and you touched on this earlier, was around knowing your stakeholders, know your approval pathways, who are the people that you need to influence to be able to get a business case over the line for bringing in new technology to be able to support the HR function. At the end of the day, HR works on behalf of the organisation as a risk mitigator. So You know, the job is to ensure that the people are engaged, motivated, know what they need to do to be able to achieve what the business outcomes are. So as part of that, you know, data is critical. Being able to use data to have accurate reporting to inform decisions, whether it is your diversity and inclusion agenda, whether it is around gaps in skills, whether it is understanding, like you said, Mark, down the track, being able to read the tea leaves of someone's behaviours and being able to head that off at the pass. Having the data at your fingertips can really help to inform, you know, what initiatives do we think as an organisation is going to help us achieve that bigger picture. I think for most HR professionals, having targets in the organisation around retention, around engagement, you know, they're actually really big targets for an HR team to be custodian of. But HR doesn't pull all the levers to be able to make all of those successful. But having the data or having the information or having the system to be able to provide consistent workflows, consistent way of reviewing an employee's career within the organisation can certainly help in supporting managers, leaders, the organisation in what they need to do. And I think taking it beyond just the leadership within the organisation all the way up to the board. So how much does the board actually understand people? Because at the end of the day, for a majority of organisations, people are at the centre of making anything work. Are the board invested in supporting the people agenda? Do they have data to understand the elements from that in guiding other decisions that are being made? I know from my experience, our board is particularly interested in the health and well-being and the engagement and the enablement of our people in being able to achieve our strategic goals and our focus areas. So being able to take data to them and have meaningful conversations has also helped in being able to engage with them around, well, what can they do to help? What have they seen in other organisations that they can also bring back to the table based on the data and the topics and the information that we can now provide to them? So there's absolutely a business case of being able to make people more at the centre of that.
I think Kate, you touched on it too yesterday. I think we haven't touched on it today, but really good point you made is around alumni and around, you know, how do you use technology to build, you know, an alumni to your organisation? Because, you know, again, particularly not for profit, the drivers and the connections people have with an organisation is really, really important, and how you build that alumni for future even references to them being able to say, well, you can go to your alumni and say, hey, we're looking for certain skill sets or people, whether they're interested or they know people that are interested. It becomes a really good vehicle for you to really develop and grow your network outside of just the immediacy of what you have in front of you. And, you know, again, the leveraging of a strong platform that enables you to maintain that, stay in contact with those people is a really critical element.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we've got 7 minutes to go. I'll stop sharing the screen, the presentation, and maybe Kira, have we got any questions that we should be addressing while we've got the three of us here?
Yes, Robert. I have a question here from Tim. Can ELMO create rosters and automatically calculate care minutes, including RN care minutes? Additionally, can it provide information on the number of minutes missed and the required minutes for the upcoming months?
Do we have a rostering tool? Yes. Can it get down to minutes? I would need to investigate. I suspect probably not. But if, Kira, if you could pass my details on and get that over to me, I can get that investigated and I get a response back.
Absolutely, perfect. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions for our panel today, please type in the questions box and we can get everyone to answer while we're here. I think everyone's a bit quiet here this morning.
Can I just add a little bit to that question just before about care minutes? I think obviously particularly in the aged care sector in particular, we're seeing a massive, I can't emphasize enough how big a challenge what was just highlighted. How do you ensure that you're able to track and monitor and understand care minutes provided by each individual, and how does that stack up against your responsibilities for your particular facility or activity, whichever it may be. I think this is definitely something that is evolving and something that a number of people are working through how to make that work as best as possible. To Robert's point, being able to track people's time by minutes is difficult, and you also need to think about how that interacts also with whatever system you're using to then capture that to claim funding. So there's a number of different inputs and outputs that need to be considered, but I'm sure Robert's going to be able to take that away with his technical team and be able to give you a really good response. But definitely something that is top of mind for just about every single aged care provider that I'm aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, if we can't do it, we may know somebody that can, and we would obviously recommend that back. So that's fine.
Perfect.
Anything else come through, Kira?
Not as yet. So just I'll remind when we're waiting for any more questions, but I'll remind everyone anyway today that there's a recording of this webinar that I will upload and send out to everyone by email later on. And also Mark's slides today will be attached to that, and it'll be available on our website for anyone to look at later. Also, I think we've got another webinar going to be looking at the webinar with ELMO later on in the year as well. We haven't decided on the topic yet, but definitely we'd love everyone to come back and join that. And also, if anyone out there wants to look at any more webinar training that we have, please do go to our training website. On our website, we've got heaps more webinars, all different topics for everybody to upskill. No more questions, I think, guys. So I think you must have covered pretty much everything today.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I guess if the people that are attending, they must have some interest and some need. Yeah, happy to help out, and I'm sure Mark's very happy to help with some of the thinking behind it as well. And Kate's there at the Connecting Up organisation, so it would be a good team to get involved in if you do need anything.
Yes, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kate, Mark, and Robert for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and we'll chat to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
See you.
Yeah.